Well, ladies and gentlemen, hello again, welcome to another Reflected Reality Simulations video. My name is Graham, we're in X-Plane 10 again, and it's the FlyJSim 727. This is the 727-100 and it's version 2 of the FlyJSim model. We're here in the UK, despite the fact we're flying this American liveried aircraft, just over the Pennines. You can see Manchester Airport down here. And this is a conclusion of the start of the flight in Glasgow I videoed a few days ago. What we're going to look at is just the basic arrival onto the ILS at Heathrow, runway 27 left. Using the radio aids on the aircraft, we'll also look at managing the descent in the 727 because it's quite a challenging aircraft with the equipment it's got available. So the sim's paused at the moment. Let's have a look at the aircraft setup. So I've got VOR tuned, it's Bovingdon 113.75, and the Heathrow VOR London is 113.6 on here. What that means is the aircraft's tracking towards Bovingdon. I want to be at Bovingdon at 7,000 feet or flight level 70. It's about 100 miles or so away, and 115 miles to the airfield. The INS is all aligned and displaying the ground speed here, but no waypoints loaded. It's really just for a ground speed readout more than anything else. The aircraft's flying on autopilot, holding flight level 310 and tracking the VOR. So the first thing that we need to take care of is managing the descent. So what I'll do is I'll take the pause off and we'll have a chat about that just as we go. It should all make sense. It's quite a straightforward arrival from here. So I'm at 31,000 feet, more or less. We'll work on the basis QNH is 1013 today, so there's no change between the flight level and the altitude. I want to be at 7,000 feet at Bovingdon. So what that means is I've got 24,000 feet to lose. Remember the 3 times table? Well, 24 become 48 and then 72. I need a minimum of 72 miles, and the 727 is quite a slippery machine, so I'll add on 20 miles to that. That means 92 miles. As luck would have it, I'm at 95 at the moment, so I want to get ready to start going down to Bovingdon. To make life straightforward, we'll go straight down to 7,000 feet or flight level 70, and how we do that is just click it so that it disengages the alt hold. And my preferred way of flying it is just on the pitch command here. So I'm going to click it 4 times. That should give them about 4 or 5 degrees, and I'll bring the thrust back. I'm at 0.85 at the moment, that's fine. Targeting about certainly no less than 280 knots in the descent. I'll just bring the thrust back. So what's important is an awareness of the ground speed that I've got. Thrust is coming back to about almost idle. As long as it stays in the green band, that should be fine. So based on that 500 knots ground speed, I need about 2,500 plus another 250, so about 2,750 feet per minute. That's going to be a little bit of an ask, really. That would be this mark here on the VSI. Jet aircraft are not very good at going down, losing height and slowing down simultaneously. So that extra 20 miles, I'm going to use that to good effect. I'm going to use that extra 20 miles to slow down a little bit later on. What we'll do is just keep an eye on the altitude and find out how much distance we've got to go. The navigation's straightforward. The aircraft's flying itself on VOR lock towards Bovingdon. That's fine. So as I approach 27,000 feet, that's 20,000 feet to lose. That would be 60 miles, plus another 20 miles would be the 80 miles. So as long as I've got more than 60, I'm okay. And the value more than 60 on the distance counter here, that's the margin I've got to allow the aircraft to slow down. So we'll just see how that does as we come through that 27,000 feet. So 27,000, I need 60 miles, I've got 76, so 16 miles spare, which is more than adequate just now. And we'll just keep looking at that on the way down. As well, before we get to flight level 200, I just want to review the arrival. Bring up the VREF card and make sure I've got bugs set for 30. So VREF is going to be 119. Add on 5 knots, that 124 for the arrival. So it's going to be just square in the middle of those bugs there. The auto brakes are up here. I'm going to use the minimum auto brake for the arrival. If you saw the video out of Glasgow, the first part of this video, you'll know that I've changed the pilot notes around a little bit. The reason for doing that is just to fit more closely with how I operate on a day-to-day basis, to make the checks a little bit more comfortable for me. But we've got some after landing checks and some shutdown checks in there to do as well. This isn't taken from any real life 727 documentation. This is just based on my experience operating this particular model in the sim in a way that seems to make sense. So progressing towards Bovingdon, it's 66 miles there to the beacon and about 80 miles to the airfield. I've got the radio nav aid set, so the ILS 109.5. 109.5 is tuned on both nav 1 and nav 2. It should all be good to go. Let's set the minimums as well, so 280 baro for Heathrow 27 left. I've got the thrust right on idle, speed's manageable, and see, as we lose altitude, despite the fact the airspeed hasn't changed much, I've lost about 100 knots of ground speed as the TAS drops off. The good thing there is the sync rate I need is only around, what's that, 2,100, 2,300, so it's a little bit closer than the 27 I needed, and we're coming back to a 3-degree glide slope, or 3-degree profile now. The aircraft's got a TAS readout over here, so I've got nil wind set at the moment, so 420 and about 420, that's fine. If you had wind selected, then obviously the IR gives you much more useful information. But you can do it with the TAS as well. Just adds another dimension on there. So as I pass through 20,000 feet, this is 21 at the moment, as I pass through 20,000, that would be another 13,000 feet to lose. So 13, 26, 39, and I had 20 miles when I started off, so that'd be 49, 59. So I'm eroding some of my margin, but that's to be expected as we've got that high TAS at high altitude. Still got at least 14 miles of margin, so that's fine. Coming through flight level 200, I will put the fasten seatbelt sign. Just have a look on the outside while we're arriving here. It's still a really nice looking model. At the moment, certainly today on xplane.org store, there's a 4th of July sale, so I've been able to pick up the paint schemes, the complete paint pack for the 727 for about $7, which is definitely worthwhile. There's a lot of lovely European colour schemes in there, and the 727 dates from that era where the airline colour schemes are all quite vibrant and interesting, as opposed to these days where it's a little bit more subdued, shall we say. It's a great looking aircraft. Just have a look on the systems panel, make sure everything's set up on here as I'd expect. Yeah, that's just the way the light's reflecting. Difficult to tell, those would appear to be on. I did use a save situation on this, so there'll be a few little bits and pieces out of position. I'm not overly worried about the fuel heat. The thing the sim hasn't remembered is the cross feeds would have been closed, but to be honest, it doesn't appear to make much difference the way this model's set up. I don't know much about the cargo heat outflow or the Gasper fan on the pressurization and air conditioning panel here. If anybody knows what these are for, please let me know in the video comments. I'd love to hear that. So I've passed through 17,000 feet. I've got 9,000 feet to lose, 9, 18, 27. I need 27 miles and I've got 41. So that's holding steady on that 14 mile surplus. It's pretty good. You see with the flight director pitch command being right up here, I find it easier to fly on that than looking down here for the vertical speed. You could do it on vertical speed, or you could do it with the speed target as well. Either, whatever way you prefer, really, it doesn't make much odds. To have the flight director on as well, really, there's forelock, and we've got the flight director V-bar. So what I want to do is approaching flight level 100. I need to have the speed back to around 250 knots. I'm going to achieve that. Well, we'll just bring that back to 250. Remember, there's no auto thrust. This is just a marker more than anything else for me. But when I get to about 12,000 feet, what I'll do is reduce the increase the pitch angle. That'll help the aircraft slow down. Once I get to 250 knots, I'll lower the nose again. And you'll see how that 14-mile margin that I had built in to the descent is going to get eroded as we slow down. What you've really got to be aware of is things like tailwinds pushing you along. Obviously, the the ground speed would be higher with a higher tailwind, but the sink rate you can achieve is the same, so you cover more distance to lose the same altitude. But that 20-mile margin is usually pretty good. That gives you a fair amount to work with there. Also remember, when we're descending, we want the autopilot to capture a target altitude, so make sure you've got Alt Select up here. So when I get to 12,000 feet, I've got another 5,000 to lose. That would be 15 miles. I'm going to have something in the region of 28. That's 13 miles to slow down. Looks good to start slowing down, so I'll just increase the pitch back to more or less level. See, the vertical speed drops off and the airspeed will start to come back. I'm not increasing the thrust. 3 degrees is about the best you can do with a jet aircraft on idle thrust. Especially the 727 seems to be especially slippery. The 737 seems to bleed speed off a little bit better, but I don't know if it's to do with the profile, the fact it's got a lovely clean wing, or just the nature of the low bypass jets, but it's a lot harder to slow down than some of the other aircraft. So I knew I needed, from 12,000 feet, I needed to lose 5,000 feet, so the minimum was 15 miles. And the speed's coming back nicely to 250 knots. So what I can do is blow the nose a little bit again and try and maintain that 250. To fly a 3-degree profile at the moment, 300 knots more or less, we'll half that, gives us 150, so 1500 plus another 150, 1750, which is almost what we've got dialed up on the VSI at the moment. Again, I'm making life quite easy for this video by flying straight towards the beacon. It's not always like that in real life, and if you find yourself flying an aircraft like this which has got no FMC to assist you, then you've really just got to do the best job you can. If you're flying a complicated VOR routing, then you could consider having perhaps the runway or the airfield in as a waypoint on here, and then at least you can show the distance to the waypoint. And you would use the distance on here rather than the distance on the HSI. That's through flight level 100, so I'll put the lights on and verify that we've got the seatbelt sign selected. Excellent. So it's only 2,000 feet to go. Distance is at least 16 miles, so that's looking good. If I have a rate of descent that's about 1/3 of my ground speed, so I'm looking for about 1,000 feet per minute at the very most now. I'll put a little bit of thrust on to maintain 250 knots. And what flying this aircraft really drives home is that you can try and be super efficient when you're flying an FMC equipped aircraft. It's really, really helpful. With these old school machines, there's certainly a lot more, you'd need a lot more experience operating the aircraft to be as slick with it as you could be on a modern FMC equipped jet. But that being said, there's a lot of satisfaction when everything comes together and you do exactly what you're hoping to do. So approaching Bovingdon, we'll probably have the speed back to 220 knots as well. So I'll dial 220 in there, and I'll just bring the thrust back to idle. That'll help us slow down. Good thing about the 727 is we'll be clean as well at 220. So we should only have about 1,000 feet to go. We're listening for the altitude alerter to tell us that as well. There we go, light comes on. Just check that we've got auto select because it would get messy if we didn't have that. So when I get to Bovingdon, I want to leave on a track of about, I think 128 rings a bell. What I'll do is, looking down here, I'll take it out of Vorlock, put it into turn knob. I don't have heading selected, so it'll just keep the wings level. Look for that 128 radial. And it's keeping wings level, so I can do anything with the bug I want. I'll just leave it on a more or less an intercept there. Keeping things like the speed in the scan as well. Very easy to forget about your speed if you're used to flying a machine on auto throttle or auto thrust all the time. I expect the DME counter to go down to 1 at a minimum. A bit of thrust coming on as the aircraft levels. There we go, it's got alt. And what I'll do is, if you remember, I've got a keyboard shortcut to put it into heading select mode. But there we go, and we'll turn to just make an effort to intercept that radial outbound. You'll be able to see it on the pointer here as well, come around, passing down the right hand side of the aircraft. So looking towards London, you can see all the reservoirs over here. Heathrow is in this kind of area, and there's the River Thames, the city, and I believe that's the Lee Valley reservoirs there as well. Okay, 220 knots. Shouldn't have been talking and looking outside, we went slightly through, so what I'll do is come back and I'll stick it back into Vorlock just to make life easy. So I want to go out to about 20 miles from Bovingdon. And so that I've got an awareness of the airfield, if you've not seen all my other videos, there's a video I've done, radar vectored arrival into London Gatwick, where I've got some gates 15 degrees off and 12 miles out from the airfield. Well, we don't have any fixed page to draw that on here, but what we do have is a pointer towards the airfield. Fortuitously, we've got a VOR 113.6 on the field, and a distance counter as well. So that needle there is pointed towards the airfield. It's as good as we can do for SA at the moment. There we go, it's following the VOR outbound, doing 220 knots. When I get to about 15 miles, I'll start coming back to 180 knots, and we'll start the aircraft descending. It'd be quite common to get an intermediate descent down to maybe 6,000 feet, so you'd be at flight level 70 just now. Descend to 6, so set 6 in there. I'll click the altitude select button, check that it's still got alt cell in yellow there, and then lower the pitch attitude. And it beeps to say 1,000 feet to go. So the Airfield is more or less off the right wing tip at the moment. Let's have a look. There we go. See, the 727 needs the thrust levers quite far back, otherwise it will pick up speed really quite quickly. And again, just flying it on the pitch command, it's much easier than looking down here and messing with this. You could put keyboard shortcuts on that if you wanted, but I find flipping the knob back and forth between pitch and vertical speed just harder than simply flying it on the flight director command. You can also fly it manually as well if you've got a yoke. I'm right-handed. I've got a joystick in my right hand and a mouse in my right hand, so I find it's easier to use the automatics. But if you've got a yoke, you can fly with one hand and use the mouse with the other, then that would work as well. So approaching 12 miles outbound, I'm going to start bringing the speed back to 180 knots. So 200 initially, and then a 180. Before I go below 200, I'll select flaps 2, and that's me good down to 190 knots. And before going below 190, I select flaps 5. There we go, flaps 5. A little bit of thrust on. And we'll get ready to descend again down to 4,000. Do that in the right order. There we go. Lower the pitch. I'm making sure I keep the speed at 180 knots now. But there we go, it's about 15 degrees off and 12 miles out. 270 will be the inbound track. But just about 20 degrees just now and 12 miles, so that's pretty good for a gate. I'm finished with that. I'll put the localizer on there instead, and 272. You can see it on that side. Not so much interest in the localizer bar because that's giving me the wrong information at the moment thanks to X-Plane, but just keeping an eye on the glide slope indicator there. You can see it says glide slope because the instruments are showing different things. That's understandable. And what we'll do is take it back out of forelock into turn knob, and finish with the VOR, and I'll set 272. So they should both be showing the same. What I'll do is turn onto a southerly heading. So here's the keyboard shortcut. So 13 miles out, I need to be at 4,000 feet at 12. It's looking okay. I can actually lower the nose, there's a little bit of margin left. Let me just flick that one back momentarily. So yeah, only a few degrees to go. I start the right turn to intercept. This is where it gets a little bit messy. Obviously, if you've got a nice HSI with fixed lines and everything drawn, life gets a little bit easier here. Probably cleared down to 3,000 feet just now. And on that heading we should be good to intercept. It's maybe a little bit shallow. Let's have a look. Still maintaining 180 knots. By this point we come back to 160 knots. Good thing is flat 5, speed can come all the way back to 160. And I'll make sure that we're in the auto approach mode. Approach auto. Check the FMAs. I've got lock and glide slope simultaneously, so hopefully it will turn. There we go. Just make sure that's all synchronized as well, and I'll come back to 160. From 160, I mean normally we'll go down to about maybe 4.5 miles, but to make life easy, take it down to 6 miles and then get fully stabilized from that point onwards. I've got 3,000 feet in. That's okay for the moment. Missed approach would normally be 2000 on this side, but there's no air traffic around and 3000 keeps it nice and straightforward. Speed brakes, I'll arm them just now. I think you can do that. Just to make life easier. So it's doing a really nice job of following the ILS. Check across on the other side, got the same indications as well. You see the thrust is all the way at idle, and flaps 5 it's just barely holding its own. So what I'll do is I'll select gear down, flap 15, that's me good for 150. Then flaps 25. 20, sorry, there's an intermediate stage, then 25 and 30. Coming back to final approach speed and bringing some power on. There you go, so just a little bit earlier, but gets us all stabilised so we can see the final part of the flying. Power's coming up, targeting that speed here. I've got gear down with 3 greens, flaps, 30, green light, and speed brakes armed. Got an auto brake selection, auto brake minimum. Just take a second to have a look outside at this aircraft. When it's flaps 30, it's got a lot of flap out. When it's got flap 40 selected, there's an absolutely huge amount of flap area on the 727. It's one of the remarkable features of the aircraft. It unfolds pretty much half of its wing. There you go, so everything's looking fine, passing through 4 miles, back at the final approach speed, plus a little bit. When we get to 1000, I'll take the autopilot out and we'll fly it manually on the flight directors. And once again, I think I maybe mentioned in the previous video, I'm used to flying with a crosshairs kind of flight director, so this V-bar is a little bit unusual, so that's my excuses out the way early for why it's not all going to go quite as smoothly as it perhaps should do. If you fly the aircraft frequently, you'll get to know the power datums, what EPR settings you require, that sort of thing, to make it do exactly what you want. So 1000 feet, we're on glide slope, on speed, fully configured, looking good. So I'll take the autopilot out and we'll just fly it on the flight directors. It's really good for keeping your instrument scan going. With this version of the model, there's a little bit of lag showing in the ADI, but the flight director still behaves correctly, so you just do the very best you can. It's not so bad when you've got a horizon visible out the window as well. Landing technique in the 727 is it's quite similar to most other aircraft, the difference being as you take the thrust off it doesn't have a pitch down moment because the engines are on the tail, but also the main gear is quite far aft of the point the aircraft rotates around. So if you're trying to arrest a high rate of sink in the final few feet, all you're going to do is put the gear down really quite firmly. If you get a high sink rate in the last 100 feet or so, it's probably easier to go around and have another go rather than smack the aircraft into the tarmac. There we go. I've got 3 reds, but glide slope looks okay. Quite sensitive in pitch. There we go. And left reverse. $80 knots. And I'll take manual braking now. So pushing the brake button to let the auto brakes come out. And we'll take the next exit. There we go. Really looking forward to the X-Plane 10.5 with the new Heathrow scenery. I'm sure that'll be really quite nice. So down to taxiing speed. Not making any changes on the aircraft just now. We'll just taxi off, we'll follow the inner taxiway, and we'll park on one of the 300 stands out to the east. So at this point, the other pilot would be turning off the landing lights and the strobe lights. We'll leave that to her straight away on the taxiway. No point in doing it and then running onto the grass. What we can do is get our little checklist up so we've got something to look at as well. Again, on my previous video I mentioned that you normally do the procedures from memory and then follow them up with a checklist, but for simulation purposes with only one person operating it, it's entirely satisfactory just to use the notes as a read and do kind of list. So we'll have the landing lights off, taxi turn off lights on, and strobes off, so we just walk through all the lights there. Window heat and anti-ice can go off, that's up here, window heat off. Anti-ice is already off, and P2 heat off. There we go, flaps can go up. I'll use the joystick button for that. Make sure the speed brakes are down, they are. Turn off the TCAS and turn off the radar. There we go. Taxiing in slowly, so on the flight engineers panel we can set the pressurization controller to ground till depressurize. Turn the galleys off to reduce the load on the APU when necessary, and we'll get the APU started, but critically I'll not put it on bus at the moment. There's a few other things we've got to do, so if I put it up to start, it's winding up, and we'll back in and taxi the aircraft. If it's a short taxi in or a difficult airfield, then just come to a halt and take it nice and easy. So we'll try and find somewhere appropriate to park. I think Heathrow looks very different nowadays from what it looks like on the sim at the moment. But it's been quite a few years since I was in this part of Heathrow. So turn up here, I think stand 300, 311 something. Sounds familiar. You can see this part of Heathrow, it can be a little bit of a maze of cul-de-sacs and so on. But we'll get to where we need to go in the end. What I'll do is I'll turn all the lights off just now before we point the aircraft at the stand. Looks like an appropriate stand there. Make sure we've got good wingtip clearance. And see if we can put the aircraft roughly where we want it. There's no lines onto the stand or lead-on lines onto the stand, which would make life a little bit easier. But we'll just drive roughly towards the 311 sign there. Check on the outside very briefly. It's all going to fit. Rather than stand guidance, just cheat, look outside. It works just as well. That'll probably do. We'll set the parking brake there and we'll shut the aircraft down. So I've got the parking brake set. This where it's a little bit different because we've got some flight engineer stuff to do as well. So first things first, check we've got pressure there and hydraulic pressure. Go into the flight engineers panel and What I want to do is to minimise the electrical current before I put the APU on bus. So what I'm going to do is turn off the hydraulic system B. Both engines are still, or the engine pumps are still running. I'll turn those off. I'll turn the packs off. A couple of reasons behind that, but both packs off first of all. Make sure the bleeds are all open. And then we'll put the APU generator on. Now watch what happens with the current here. As I close the field, and then I'll close the gen. And it comes up to a very low level there. If you've got the packs on or the hydraulic pumps on, the APU will go off the scale there. It'd be probably bad for it in real life. So you can see that there's no power coming out of the engine generators, it's all the APU now. We can shut down the engines. The engine's cut off. And then the second pilot, once the engines are coming down, turn off the beacon. Set the transponder to 2000 off. I'll not bother with 2000, but we'll set it to off. And passenger signs. Turn off the seatbelts. And that should be us, all shut down on stand. As it stands, the APU is providing the power for the aircraft. Got the packs shut off. If you wanted a little bit of air conditioning, we could probably put one of the packs back on again. Let's see what that does. Yeah, it's a little bit of airflow and packs running now. If you shut down the packs before you turn the engines off, if there's any exhaust gas smells or that sort of thing, by turning the packs off you prevent it being ingested back into the cabin. That's the last thing you want your customers to think about, is the smell of jet fuel as you shut down. So it's dropped the generators offline because the APU is providing the power and the engines are shut down anyway. I guess we could probably trip the field on there as well. Don't know. As I said, I've never operated a system panel on an aircraft of this sort of vintage. But again, any feedback you have, if you've got any knowledge of how the field and the generators work on the real machine, I'm very happy to hear that. That's a very standard ILS arrival, and using the inertial system just to get a ground speed readout to manage the descent as well. I hope you found the video useful and entertaining. I've got a few more paints for the 737 to have a look at, so maybe do some different routes with it. Sorry, the 727. But that'll be the last video for a week or so. Need a few days off. Few days off work and a few days away from the computer as well. But there'll be some more content coming up shortly. I've got some ideas for some IXEG 737 content, as well as a few more trips in the 727 as well. As always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you found it enjoyable and interesting, and if you've got any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section. Thanks very much, and I'll speak to you again shortly.